The night Marco made his 10 o'clock round through the back corridor of the Vane estate, he did what he had done for 8 years. He kept his eyes forward, his steps quiet, and his opinions entirely to himself. That was the job, Mr. Vane did not employ men who noticed things they were not meant to notice. And Marco had long ago trained himself to see only what was required of him, and to file the rest somewhere unreachable. So when he passed the kitchen door that Thursday and heard a voice, low, barely more than breath, he nearly kept walking. He would have, if the voice had not been so unexpected. The kitchen at that hour belonged to silence. Cook's hours ended at 9. The new girl, Nella, was meant to be in the staff quarters by past. He stopped, not for any professional reason, simply because the sound was strange. She was standing at the long wooden table with her back to the door, her hands flat on the surface, and she was whispering a name. He could not make it out fully. Only one syllable, small and careful. The way a person says something they have said 10,000 times in private, and never once aloud to anyone who could hear them. She said it twice. Then she pressed her palms harder against the wood and was quiet. Marco stood in the corridor. For a moment he could not account for. Then he heard a second set of footsteps behind him, and he turned. Mr. Vane. Cardo Vane was not a man who moved without purpose. He was in his mid-40s, broad through the shoulders, particular stillness of someone who had spent a long time learning that the less he moved, the more carefully the world paid attention. He was still in his suit jacket, though the hour was late, and his face carried the expression Marco knew best. The one that gave nothing away, the one that the men at the table, and the rivals across the city, and the staff in every corridor of this house read as cold, and which Marco, after 8 years, knew was simply the face of a man who had grown very tired of being watched. He came to stand at the kitchen door, heard what Marco had heard. He did not move on. Marco took 2 silent steps back into the shadow of the corridor and became, as was his habit, invisible. Nella did not hear either of them. She was not the kind of woman who occupied a great deal of space. 26 years old, dark-haired, careful hands, and the habit of moving through a room as though she were aware, always, of not being entirely welcome in it. She had come to the Vane household 6 weeks earlier through an agency, recommended for her kitchen work and her quietness in equal measure. The other staff found her polite and difficult to know. She asked nothing of anyone. She did her work. She left no trace. No one at the Vane estate knew. What she had told no one in 2 years, not the agency, not the landlady before this position, the sister she no longer spoke to, was the name she had just whispered into the empty kitchen. A child, a daughter, born too early, in a winter that had already taken everything else from her. 3 days old. The name had seemed important, afterward, to keep saying, to keep the child from becoming only a fact. She said it when she was certain no one could hear. She had been certain tonight. When the kitchen door opened, she startled and turned, and found Cardo Vane standing in the frame. She had spoken to him perhaps 4 times since her arrival. Household matters. Brief exchanges mediated by the housekeeper. She had the impression, as most of the staff did, that Mr. Vane moved through the house the way weather moved through a valley. Present, inevitable, not personal. She straightened immediately. "Sir, I'm sorry. I thought the kitchen was. I'll go." "Sit down," he said. It was not an unkind instruction. It was simply the way he spoke. Not accustomed to softening what he meant, because for a very long time no one had required him to. She sat, though she had not been planning to. And he came into the kitchen and pulled out the chair across from her, and sat as well. It was not something she had ever heard of him doing. For a moment neither of them spoke. The kitchen was warm. The range held its last heat from the evening. Outside, the walled garden was dark and entirely still. "Who is it," he said, "that you talk to?" It was not quite a question. Nella looked at him. The sensible answer was to deflect, to say she had been thinking aloud, to apologize, to steer the conversation to something manageable. She had deflected for 2 years. She was very good at it. She looked at his face. There was nothing in it of the prying curiosity she had learned to guard herself against. There was something older than that, something that recognized the shape of what she had been doing. She told him the name. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, without looking away, "My wife's name was Carla." He said it the way she had said the name, carefully. particular weight of something kept for a long time in a closed room. I haven't said it out loud since the funeral. 3 years ago. Nella looked at her hands on the table. I say it sometimes, he said, when I think no one's there. The kitchen held them both. No one asked anything more of either of them that night. After a while, Cardo rose, said good night in the same even tone he used for everything, and left. Nella sat at the table for a long time after. She did not feel as she had expected to feel, exposed. She felt, in some way, she did not entirely have words for, that she had been standing in a hallway for 2 years, and someone had quietly opened a door. Cardo watched it change. In the weeks after, the way you watch a season turn, without being able to point to the exact morning it happened, Mr. Vane began taking his coffee in the kitchen. Not every morning, 3 or 4 times a week, in the early hour before the house woke fully. He did not make conversation at first. He read correspondence at the end of the table while Nella worked. She did not adjust herself for him, did not perform cheerfulness or silence. And Marco noted, from his post in the corridor, this seemed to be precisely what was required. The feared man in the company of, or the person who was neither afraid of him nor in need of anything from him, became simply a man who drank his coffee and let himself be somewhere. They talked gradually. He asked about her work. She told him plainly, without embellishment. She asked, once, about the garden, whether the pear tree in the walled corner was still living or only it. And he told her that it had not bloomed in 2 summers but that he had not had it cut. She nodded as though that made sense. It did. The staff noticed. They were careful not to say so in any way that mattered. Marco noticed them noticing and said nothing at all. What Marco saw, on the morning that stayed with him, was this. Nella standing at the kitchen window looking out at the pear tree, and Cardo coming in and standing beside her without announcing himself, and both of them looking at the same tree for a moment before she said, quietly, that she thought it would bloom in the spring if left alone. Cardo said nothing for a beat. Then he said, I'll leave it alone then. He said it about the tree. Marco did not think he was only talking about the tree. The walled garden, on a Tuesday in early November, with the last of the season's light flat and pale across the stone. Nella had gone out after the lunch service to bring in the last of the kitchen herbs before the cold settled in for good. Cardo was there ahead of her, standing near the pear tree, his jacket on despite the chill, hands in his pockets looking at nothing in particular. She nearly retreated. He saw her before she could. Stay, he said. She came and stood a few feet from him. The garden was quiet. The big house behind them held its usual careful stillness. I want to ask you something, he said, and I want you to know that whatever you say, nothing changes about your position here. Nothing changes about anything. I want that to be clear before I ask. She looked at him steadily. I would like, he said, take a walk with you on Sunday, in the village or the lane, wherever you'd choose. Not as employer and staff, as, he stopped. For a moment he looked. Marco would say later. Like a man standing at the edge of something he was not entirely certain would hold him. 2 people who have said each other's names. The garden was still. Somewhere past the wall, a car moved along the lane and was gone. Nella looked at the pear tree, then back at him. Sunday, she said, would be fine. Cardo Vane nodded once. The way he nodded when something had been decided. He did not smile. Not quite. But something in his face, the face that Marco had watched for 8 years give nothing away to anyone, settled into a new arrangement. Something eased. Something that had been held closed for a very long time opened, just slightly, and let the November air in, turned, and walked the rest of his corridor. He did not write it in any log. Some things he had learned are not for records. They are simply for knowing, quiet, earned, and whole.